Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Mayor Shelley Brindle here in Westfield, and incredibly excited about the panel that we have what we're going to be having tonight about a great discussion called Beyond the Gazebo, the Impact and Importance of Public Spaces and Civic Life. And it is a world-class panel joining us today, and I have the pleasure of doing the introductions and then handing it over to a moderator and leaving them to do all the hard work. So we have a lot to cover and we don't have a lot of time. So I'm just going to get right to some of the introductions, and I'm going to begin right here at home with our very own town planner, Don Stamet. Many of you might be familiar with Don by now. He's done a couple of these Facebook Lives with me and others, and he has been our town planner for 6 years. And very importantly, he had spent 11 years as a director of planning and redevelopment for Asbury Park, guiding its redevelopment efforts. And if anybody has been to Asbury Park lately, you've seen the transformation that has occurred there. And prior to Asbury Park, he was in Montclair and did many important things, including creating the town's first locally designated historic district. So Don is a Rutgers guy, a master's in city and regional planning from the Bloustein School. Seems to be a generator of great public policy and planning experts. So thank you for being here, Don. Next, and usually I'd say to the left of me, but somewhere one of these squares is Richard Heapes. Richard is the Senior Vice President of Streetworks Development of Hudson's Bay Company Properties and Investments. Many of you might have seen some of Richard's previous presentations to the town. He is a nationally recognized expert in the planning and design of urban mixed-use developments with 30 years of experience in cities around the world. He has directed the planning, design, and public consensus building for more than 50 main streets across the country, and many of them have been recipients of national awards of excellence. As a developer, Richard led the creation and public education efforts for the $313 million Blueback Square development in West Hartford, Connecticut. And more recently, and very importantly, across the country, he managed the creation and effort for Streetworks' $2+ billion redevelopment of downtown Detroit, Michigan, which has certainly enjoyed quite a renaissance in the last few years. Next, somewhere on one of these squares is Dan Biederman, who's the founder and president of BRV. He began his career by turning around dangerous and neglected areas of Midtown Manhattan. And many of you are very familiar with some of these iconic things, including Bryant Park Corporation, the 34th Street Partnership, and the Grand Central Partnership. And he currently serves as the president of the first of those two downtown management organizations. This is quite a treat for me. I worked alongside next to Bryant Park at HBO for 22 years. Bryant Park was my second home. I watched this evolution of Bryant Park become what we know it is today, which is really one of the premier parks in the country and right up there favorably compared with great parks of London and Paris. So I would watch people fight to get on the green for movie night, and I was at Broadway Thursdays, and I think all of us have probably been to the ice rink. So it's been an incredible transformation, Dan, and we're really incredibly fortunate to have you here today, not to mention what you've done in the 34th Street Partnership and Herald Square and Penn Station and all those other great things. So known for creating beautiful streetscapes and public spaces that engage communities, we are very fortunate to have Dan bringing his expertise to Westfield.
Thank you.
Next on this screen is Phil Abramson. Many of you might have seen Phil. He is our redevelopment planner. He is the attorney and the CEO of Topology. He brings about almost 15 years of experience to his work, a significant amount of which has been building his own firm, Topology, which he founded in 2014. I think many of us have seen this firsthand. Phil is an entrepreneur at heart. He brings an innovative approach and creative problem solving and numerous skill sets to the planning process. And that comes from the fact that he is a 3-time Rutgers alum, Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, a Master of City and Regional Planning from the Bloustein School, and a JD Law degree from the Rutgers School of Law. So that's the trifecta, Phil. So we're thrilled to have you as well. And moderating this panel tonight is Asima Jansveld. Asima is an 11-year Westfield resident and who also serves on Westfield's planning board. Asima's probably regretting the day she submitted a volunteer application to serve on numerous committees in town. And we immediately grabbed her and appointed her to the planning board. And I'm sure, Asima, you never expected that you'd be recruited to moderate a panel and other things. So I hope you don't regret the submitting the application, but we're great appreciated for your service. Asima is currently a vice president at the High Line in New York City, and she leads the High Line Network. And I think this is so cool. It's a strategic hub and peer learning community for leaders, reimagining urban infrastructure as equitable open spaces across North America. She's trained as an urban planner. She focuses on the intersection of social, environmental, and economic impacts of place-based development. Previously held leadership roles at the New York City Economic Development Corporation and others, and including developing a citywide industrial policy in New York, building a racial equity program for national mayors, thank you, Asima, and supporting 10 American cities in developing resilient strategies through the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And very importantly, and close to my heart, Asima is also a fellow graduate of the University of Virginia. So that is another reason why we have lots to like about Asima. So that is our illustrious panel for this evening. And there's a lot to cover. And Asima is going to be our moderator here and kind of take us through it. So with that, Asima, I'm handing it over to you.
Thanks, Mayor Brindle. I knew UVA would get a shout out in there somewhere.
You even put it in your bio. I couldn't resist.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be in conversation with this team that's going to be so instrumental to the transformation of Westfield's downtown over the next few years, and probably one of the most significant transformations for our town in decades. And it's a really exciting time. And as we said in one of our prep sessions, this is really a session to help start imagining what is possible and be inspired by what all of our folks on the panel here have done in other places and what we could be bringing to downtown in Westfield. I moved to Westfield certainly because of the downtown and the open spaces almost 12 years ago, as I know many other folks have. And as Mayor Brindle said, I spend my days working with leaders of open spaces across North America, really talking about what the potential is for quality open space to bring social, health, economic, and environmental benefits to our communities. So with that, we have a lot of ground to cover. We'll turn it over to Don Sammet first to give a little bit of background on how have we thought about or planned for open space within Westfield to date, and what are we using as kind of our guiding documents to think about what our future holds. Dan?
Sure. Thanks, Asima. Yeah, I mean, I'll say it's really impressive to see Westfielders' dedication to public spaces. I mean, this isn't the case in all communities. I mean, so we may think that it is, but it really, you don't always find this. I think the panelists tonight would agree that successful public spaces, they don't just happen, right? It takes a dedication to make them work. There are some key town documents that show that the dedication that you all have to really, I look at public spaces as sort of the front porch of a community, right? They are places where we all gather. But I wanted to share some of those documents that are out there for everyone today so you can hear about, what's been done already. I'm sure we could go back to the founding of the town, find history and why we have what we have. But for tonight, I'm just going to go back 30 years to 1991, and I'm going to focus on the downtown as well. I'm not going to read these quotes that I pulled from some of our plans, although I did highlight some of the text. You can find them all in the documents. And really, I pulled out things that show that the master plan, that other documents show that the provision of and improvement of public spaces is really a goal of ours. The idea of public spaces isn't just a land use issue, it's an economic development issue. The master plan going back to 1991 put their importance in the downtown economic development section of the plan, not just a recreation section. And with your master plan, it's important to note that it isn't just some random study. A master plan is very important. It's your policy umbrella under which all your land use regulations are based. It helps guide the development of a town, Development is supposed to be consistent with your master plan. It's a statement of the town's principles, its vision, its goals. So when a builder or a redeveloper comes in, they're going to see that public spaces are part of the equation for what's going to happen in Westfield. We can just go to the next slide. The Downtown Westfield Corporation, which of course is an award-winning Main Street organization, is a strong advocate for public spaces. It calls the downtown, and I would agree, it's a center of community life here in Westfield. And in 1999, the DWC created the Downtown Westfield Improvement Plan. And that plan includes what are termed special focus areas, public places where improvements are recommended. A number of recommendations for improving the pedestrian environment in downtown Westfield. And just a little piece of information, a little factoid for you here. The images I pulled out on this slide, whereas they are public spaces, they're really quasi-public. Few may know that this is actually on private land, but they still function as part of public life. And public entities are very often involved in the creation of public spaces. Could we go to the next slide, please? Moving to more recent years, the town was very unfortunate to receive grant funding for the preparation of a townwide bicycle and pedestrian plan. The plan had a focus on movement, but it just didn't include going from point A to point B the easiest way possible. The plan here even recognizes that needs extend beyond being able just to walk or bike somewhere. Pedestrians need places to gather. Plan makes statements such as pedestrians help to support a more vibrant community. Think about it. We'd like to see people walking about. It attracts us to certain places. And the plan shows us an important piece of the public space puzzle. It's not just parks or plazas. It includes sidewalks and crosswalks as well, places where we may just traverse through. If we could go to the next slide. Your Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Now, much of the discussion in this plan surrounded our playing fields. However, the importance of other public spaces even made its way into this document. There was a recognition of a need for special events, recreation programs, concert events, adult fitness, wellness programs, a need for places and events that bring the community together. And there's a term, encourage unity. And I think that's very important. If we go to the next slide. 2019, after a very extensive public outreach component and process, the master plan reexamination continued to identify and state the importance of public spaces to Westfielders. Talked about how our central business district is the heartbeat of the community social activities. Places for recreational activities downtown should be nurtured. And that goal from 30 years ago in the 1991 master plan is still out there 30 years later. I talked about your dedication to your public spaces. Really, that goal from 91 has simply been updated. It states the importance of public spaces for you as a community. And the next slide, please, Dan. All right, so, we have all these studies and statements saying one way or another that public spaces are important to us. Okay, great. But, what is this really about? Are these just, a bunch of studies you have to do or have done because you got the grant money? Well, we're talking about quality of life here. You have to think about, why do you like Westfield? What does it have to offer? What makes us different from other places? It's those questions that those plans help to answer. And I think part of that answer is, we need or we want places to gather, places to experience events, places to meet with friends, places to celebrate. They're all important to us, and they should be nurtured and expanded upon. I'll end by pointing to the photographs on the slide as well as the quote. I love this quote. It's from our master plan reexamination report. But you look at the photos on the slide. We've got yoga, music, pizza runs. We even have seesaws now. I mean, they're all showing gatherings, right? And I think these gatherings are reflective of the heart of this community, and the path forward should really follow this heart. Again, I'll use the term nurture. These are the kind of things we want to support in Westfield. My fellow panelists, I'm sure, have been down this path themselves. I know they're going to provide for us some great insights on how we can move forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing them. So with that as a background, Asima, shall I turn it back to you before we head over to Richard?
Sure. Thank you, Don. Thank you for that inspirational quote. What I love about that picture also is it's showing how you really capture whatever space you can for these gatherings and these activities. And it's kind of a nice segue to Richard Heapes from Streetworks. And Richard, can we talk a little bit more about what we mean by public space and what can that look like in all of its forms in downtowns?
Well, I like the way you put that, because I think of public space two ways. One, there's the now. Oh, that's a park, that's a square, or I'm going to introduce you all to a Snickleway today, I believe. That's the noun part of public spaces, and that's what planners do a lot with. There's also the verb part of public spaces. Is it a fun park? Is it a sad park? Those are two different things, but they are both parks. And I'm thrilled to have my friend Dan Biederman follow me with how to put the verb in public spaces. But I'm going to start with the boring stuff. And by the way, I like the term public places, not public spaces, because places, look at this picture here. There's way more than just a public space. In fact, technically you can't stand in it because you'll get wet. So what I'm going to talk about is just give you a vocabulary of public spaces. And coincidentally, not surprisingly, Westfield has almost all the kinds of public places you might want in a downtown. And I think what's important, if you think about places, any of them, New York to the smallest town, I guaranteed one of the special things you'll think about is the public places and spaces, because they're often, as much as anything, what make a town special. Next slide, Dan. So I'm going to give you Urban Public Space Planning 101, and it starts with the sidewalk. If there's a more important element, I don't know what it is, because the sidewalk is what makes something familiar, feel comfortable, at home. Don used one of my favorite quotes, which are, they're the front porch of a downtown. You kind of feel like they're yours, you bump into people you know, but you're outside. And I can tell you, for me personally, the design of the sidewalk is something that I'm completely passionate about. One comment about Westfield's sidewalks, which you are experiencing now in great amounts, is they're too narrow. And so they are not as flexible as you would want. One of the things I've really enjoyed watching over the course of this master's thesis known as the pandemic in sidewalks, and I ask you all, think of all the wild and crazy things you've seen on your sidewalks over the course of the last year. You all now get a minor degree in sidewalk design because you've seen it, and your public works people have their PhDs in it. Go to the next slide, Dan. What I'm going to do, not to be talking all about us, but I'm going to, for each one of these types, show you our take on it from the work that I've been doing for the past 40 years. Next slide, Dan. So these, I'm just going to 4 or 5 slides of how we've done sidewalks and come to know sidewalks. Like I said, I've been doing this for 40 years. And I'll give you my one thing that I think about sidewalks. And that's, first and foremost, I would take any money being spent on pavers or fancy architecture or whatever, and I would use it to buy big trees. Day one. All the trees that you're seeing on this image here are within a year of being installed. We like the place to look like it's always been there. We want the scale and the shelter. And so our sidewalks are really typically places to have different experiences. And you can see here, which we'll talk about, is food. Next slide. So lesson number 2 about urban design is the cheapest way to have a fantastic sidewalk is to put food out there. And even better, put drinks. Actually, put drinks first and food second is my recommendation. And I found this slide. I just think it's the most fantastic thing. There's not one way to do a cafe. There's not any one way to do any of this, but you look at each one of these seating arrangements, they have different chairs. Some are next to the building, some are apart from the building. And I don't know what the name of this is, but it's a way to sit and be comfortable, be kind of lazy, but you can be on view at the same time and watch the world go by, and you are home when you can introduce the street cafe. I would say all of the success of our projects are a combination of big trees and a great cafe. Next slide. So when you begin to look at cafe seating that we've done throughout the country, we typically like to do our sidewalk cafes at the curb, not next to the storefront. Most towns and cities write their liquor laws so that the cafe is adjacent to the storefront. It does 2 things. It fixes how big a sidewalk cafe can be by the lease line. I can't put a cafe in front of your store. And more importantly, it takes the shopper's nose away from the storefront. And every retailer on the street is trying to get you to look at the storefront, see what's for sale, draw you in. And so when you see that, the 2 San Jose slides to the left, I can put those on any shopping street. And for example, if I have a FedEx store, not a lot of shopping going on there, I can extend the cafes and make them bigger and more prominent. Likewise, I can walk as a shopper along that whole storefront and really get immersed in that. But like everything else in this world, there's not one right way. There's always a combination of right and wrong ways. So let's go to the next slide. Talk about the square, the idea of a public square. Now, this apparently is your public square, because public square is where you tend to start rallies at and have marches. And this is a pretty exciting photograph, and I can't tell you a thing about it. But other than you need these places in a city and town to collaborate and get together. I don't know, in some towns they have people announce their candidacy. Westfield's not the same in any of this. But I love this quote. We shape our environments and then they shape us. If ever there was a truer quote about the impact that these public spaces can have on us as citizens of a place, which then feed it back into the loop. This is the point, that the town is not just built things. It can be spaces with things going on. Let's go to the next slide quickly. So these are some of the town squares that we've done around the country. And here's what's really interesting. If you look at the 2 middle slides, one's in West Hartford, Connecticut, circa, 2007. The other one is in Rockville, Maryland, circa 2002 or 3. All of these come from there. And what's interesting, they're exactly the same. Now, they're not the same materials. One's pavers, one's grass. One has some kinds of trees, some has the other, but they all have a bandstand. They can all do ice skating, and they all bring their own chairs, which I truly love. And then they have some places, particularly the lower left slide in West Hartford, where you can see and be seen. You can just hang out and be a part of the place. Look at all of these slides. I designed all these buildings, so I can say this with certainty. There's no great architecture there. The beloved parts of these are the little nuances and the chairs and the sitting and the cafes. Let's talk about the next slide. We're going to keep cranking through here. We're doing fine. So then there's something called the green. This is something, I'm a Western person, so I didn't grow up in New England with the village green. Didn't really know about it. And it's a way more articulate thing than just some lawn. What I've come to believe is that the green needs to be very flexible. So you can do anything on it, from kick a football, throw a frisbee, sit and read a book. It needs to be super flexible and flat. And next slide. What I've learned the past 10 years, very interesting, because some of these greens, this one in the middle goes back to 1989. But you'll see in Rockville and in San Jose, you can't really tell it from here, but they are all artificial turf. And what's interesting about that, how did I learn this? These greens were getting used so much that they just couldn't take the heat. And there are now so many interesting new turfs, artificial turfs, that we can really put them under the full workout. And you want to be able to do things on them, have them be beautiful. And I think this is probably the most important thing for suburban towns. The people who live in suburban towns are not living in the city for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is they're too damn hard and too damn urban. And so now with these new turfs, there's some fabulous ways to do that. Now to two of my favorite public spaces. Quimby Street is what I call a festival street. Yes, it's a street. Yes, you can get a ticket there. Yes, you can have a hard time finding parking there. But when it really comes to life is when there's something going on. Look at these people sitting in their chairs. It's amazing. The cool thing about Quimby is it doesn't go anywhere. So it's not impossible to close it and figure out all the implications of it. You can just do that. If you go to the next slide, these are some of the festival streets that we've been building across the country that don't have cars on them full time. And they get their character and whatever based on what's going on there. This is the same little 1 block street, coincidentally is the same length as Quimby Street in Bethesda and San Jose, where on a weekly basis, they probably have 5 events like these there. They're easy to put on. Why are they easy to put on? All the infrastructure for tents is there, the lighting, the sound system. These are kind of plug and play places that I think are a very interesting way. They don't look like that, but they're set up to have a party. One last slide. I just have to mention my Snickleways. Snickleways are idiosyncratic, very narrow urban places that let you whirl around in the back, getting your way to places. I think, and I've told the mayor and others here, you have a connected group of these things throughout downtown. If we were to make each one of them a wonderful, interesting way to connect downtown, you could have the most interesting downtown in America for sure. So I think there's one more slide. Oh, well, these are my Snickleways, not very good. I'm just learning about them. But what I wanted to end with, so here we've seen 7 kinds of places. These are just what they look like. I'm imagining in the work we're looking to do on the Lord and Taylor properties and on the parking lots next to the train, there can be, and to my mind should be, at least one of every type of these spaces. And so as you think about what I've just shown you, go, well, yeah, they're not all perfect. I don't like them all, but wouldn't that be fantastic if just those 2 pieces of property began to have this kind of density of public space? So I'll turn it back to you, Asima.
Thank you, Richard.
I'll be watching awe when Dan shows us how to make these things live.
Yes, definitely. One quick note for those watching on Facebook, if you have any questions, if you could post them into the Facebook chat. And just so you know, the panelists can't see those questions live while they're presenting, but someone is assembling those so that we can address some of them at the end of the conversation. And Dan Biederman, look forward to turning it over to you now to talk a little bit about the activation of these spaces and what's the potential of what we can actually do when we've created quality civic space.
Thank you, Asima. Dan, I'll move you along quickly in the interest of time so we can get some questions in. So move beyond our promotion there to the next one. And the next one. So here are some before and afters. Shelley mentioned Bryant Park on the left, a place with no programming at the time, but also some severe problems of crime, graffiti, disorder of all kinds, everything broken. On the right, the same view 15 years later. So that's the place we learned. That's the laboratory for a lot of our work across the country. Next slide shows a place in the Southwest where we capped a highway in Dallas. And united uptown and downtown Dallas in a way that made Dallas a walkable place for the first time. So people were thrilled with that, and it's created an immense amount of value for neighbors and a new place for people to gather. The next slide is another before and after from this state in Buffalo. The end of the Erie Canal was buried in the early 20th century, and a state agency hired us to program, and you're about to learn what that means for your town. And there's a lot of activity in this place called Canal Side in Buffalo. And the next slide, I think, shows the skating rink that was placed in essentially the bed of the old Erie Canal. And people from Buffalo who haven't been there in a while can't believe how much is going on there. Next slide is in Pittsburgh, a historic place in front of the Cathedral of Learning in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh, where Forbes Field used to be actually. A parking lot had been illegally created in a piece of what was Schenley Park. And with Sasaki, we created a program space with a much softer appearance. It's been a huge success. Next before and after, in a town closer to your size, Greensboro, North Carolina, really only has one good street. It's Elm Street, but at the end on the left was what that street used to end in. On the right, with not too much money and a lot of programming, what we turned that into, it's called LeBauer Park in honor of the donor. Next slide is really on the left, a lackluster public park called Levy Park in a wealthy section of Houston. And on the right, what programming has done for that. And I think we've got a slide, next one, Dan, of yes, what we view as the best playground in the United States. Closed for COVID for a while, but now open again, and it's just thrilling all the kids of Houston. Next slide. We are programming in difficult places too. You don't have the problems of disorder that San Francisco has on its streets. This is on top of a new transit center, lavishly planted. On the right, you have a silent disco. This might work well in Westfield. We haven't talked about that yet, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor, but a disco without noise. You're all listening to your own kind of music and dancing, but programming has turned that into a great space. And despite the problems they see on the streets of that area called South of Market, those have not permeated the transit center and gotten up to the rooftop park, which has been a big success, even though COVID has slowed it down. Next slide is what we mean by programming, as I promised. So these, the theory is the program space is always secure. So in some cities, we have to worry about safety, not so much Westfield, but it also draws people and generates revenue to then allow the town we're in or the real estate owner we're working with to do more in the way of programming and planting and all the other good things that make a space great, as Richard was saying. And then the public spaces create real estate value for the owners, who we have to worry about too, because they pay the real estate taxes. So to give you a better idea of how we do programming, we would apply some of these techniques to Westfield. Next slide shows that we generally, even if we know the town, we go in and have a series of workshops, which we will do in Westfield, asking everybody their opinion. This one happens to be in Indianapolis. Tough part of town as far as the park went. This group is one of numerous tables we set up asking people, where should we place various things? You know your neighborhood better than we do, and what would draw people to it, and what would make them stay longer. So the next slide shows what they decided. We call this a bubble diagram. This is Tarkington Park in Midtown Indianapolis, and these are the things we recommended they do. They implemented a bit of it. I think it'll all get implemented eventually, and its park is on its way in the right direction. The next slide is the most profound, I think, BRV insight that's kind of being copied around the country, but slowly. Westfield will be ahead of most of the other cities we've either approached or worked in. At the top is the things that make a place live, because we call them amenities. They're there every day. Those of you who know Bryant Park know you can go there at any time, and there's a ping pong game going on 14 hours a day. There are board games being passed out and used 10 hours a day. There's a reading room that's open 12 hours a day. There's an amenities cart with all kinds of other things for people to use that's open 10 or 12 hours. So the signs, the umbrellas, the putting green is open, there's petanque, all of those things aren't at any particular time. They're there all the time. Too many parks are at the bottom of this pyramid, which we'll do occasionally. We'll do a special event, but to give you an example from the South, I think, I hope I'm not going to insult any Atlantans. Centennial Olympic Park is not a good park. It's used very rarely. It's got 22 acres. I usually count 25 people in 22 acres, not a good measure. It's active when there's a big concert, and that's not a good way to keep a space active and fun, because the odds are you're not going to stumble on Atlanta at the time a large concert is underway in that park. So we try to keep our clients to the top. And in this slide, we also urge people to program with all the days of the hours of the day in mind. So you start with exercisers who are willing to come early. Families are around when office workers aren't there. The typical city office workers are there at lunch. And then seniors replace them. Students are totally flexible in their time most of the time, so they're around late afternoon when no one else is there. And then the residents come in. So that's how to get 16, the attainable thing, which is 16/7, not 24/7 activity in public spaces. And that's how we program. Next slide, Dan, is just some examples, and we can rush through this, but these are from New York and Dallas, Green Bay, where we worked with the Packers on a really good public space in a town that in truth is smaller despite its big league name than Westfield, Portland and San Francisco. And the next slide gives you an idea closer up of what these mean, and particularly to local businesses, because a lot of the people who run the kiosks and
Oh, you went on mute, Dan.
sorry, Shelley's familiar with, all of these are small businesses that are thrilled to be a part of these activities. So it's very good for small business, and we'll find ways to include your small businesses. And another slide, I think, has the same kind of thing. It's the one on the right's in Greensboro, and the one on the left in Bryant. And generally a lot of jobs created and business improved as a result of these programming activities. Next. Further, you know, the lodge, as we called it at Bryant, tremendous way to generate bigger businesses from small businesses on our winter village. So that's worked out in many other cities. Next. So movable seating will be an important part of this. It's the technique that started in Bryant Park. It's now being widely copied, but a lot of clients don't believe in it. I already can tell that the town mothers and fathers in Westfield do believe in it. So you'll be seeing a lot of movable seating if we have anything to say about it. Next slide shows Asima will enjoy this one. We were in early in the High Line. We said, you know, really ought to put some movable seating out. We think the movable seating is working better than the more expensive and complicated benches that field operations put there. And but for those, I think you'd have not enough seating being used in the High Line. Next. Richard talked about Quimby. We chose to, just as Richard did, it's interesting, we thought alike, we chose to show you what some of the pedestrian malls can look like when they're successful. It's widely acknowledged that Burlington is one of them in Vermont. That's yoga in the same way we do it, except linear. Ours is in a square. We have 1,300 people, as you're about to see, at times doing the yoga. Next. And a couple of others, one from Ithaca and one from Boulder. And obviously there's a well-known pedestrian street in Santa Monica that's doing very well. So Quimby, we think, is well set up to encourage that kind of healthy activity in a pedestrian space. Not all of them have been successful, but increasingly people have learned how to do them right. And next, I think we're at the end. Yeah, so that's 1,300. That's what 1,300 people doing yoga look like. So thank you for listening and looking forward to some good questions.
Thank you, Dan. I think one of the things that's most compelling about what you presented is the ability to uplift entrepreneurs or small businesses and communities with quality space that's created. So looking forward to seeing what those opportunities can look like in Westfield. And speaking of Westfield, Phil Abramson, now that we've gotten lots of inspiration from all over the country, if you want to bring us back to New Jersey and what it's like to actually create and develop open space within master planning efforts in towns in New Jersey.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's quite a crowd to follow. So I asked myself, how do I follow two industry icons like Richard Heapes and Dan Biederman? And it's to just try some new content that I've never tried before. So here we are. And really, like, my first title for this was like, what's Westfield's deal? And because redevelopment, the way that public spaces happen through redevelopment is all sort of about the deal that ultimately is struck between redevelopers and the municipality. And that's where I spend the vast majority of my time every day, at that nexus between the public sector and the private sector. And I think, that's the potential where amazing things happen. That's where all the innovation is in this space. So if we could go to the next slide, Dan. A lot of folks, this is the green in Morristown. And a lot of folks look at, these parks and places, and they enjoy them and they're beautiful. And nobody really thinks, like, how did this get here? How did this all happen? And, so that's what this presentation is going to be about, is a little history on each of these and how they came to be. So the things that a lot of people might not know about the Morristown Green is it's not a public park. It's private open space, privately owned, publicly accessible open space. It was granted by the Presbyterian Church for some $1,600 in 1816. It is managed by 13 trustees that have done so since 1816, and the town contributes dollars to it every year, and they have an endowment, and they do fundraising a lot through philanthropic foundations. And so, it's just, it got me thinking, right? It got me thinking about what other places exist, and how can we use redevelopment, and what vocabulary can we start thinking about as we begin to develop private spaces or public spaces in Westfield through private partnerships. What some of that toolkit look like? Dan, if we go to the next one. So, we think, okay, well, this is an old town. This town's built out. How are we going to have any public spaces here? Where would we put these new public spaces? And, all it really takes is a look from the sky, and you see a lot of blacktop. And this is some of the best places to create green spaces and these beautiful things that Richard and Dan showed us earlier. So, what some might see as a bunch of parking lots, I think people like us, and hopefully the people of Westfield, will see as just a ton of potential. If we could go to the next one. So, I'm here to do redevelopment with Westfield. And redevelopment is a capital R thing in New Jersey. It has its own statute, its own legal process. And, when we were preparing for these slides, I looked back at the statute. I looked at the definition of redevelopment. And lo and behold, this idea, and this was written right around the time of World War II, this statute. And, the dedication of spaces for streets, parks, playgrounds, or other public purposes or recreational facilities. This was to create and revitalize urban places at the time, and, towns and villages all over the state. And they recognized even then that open spaces were going to be part and parcel to the redevelopment process. And it absolutely is the redevelopment legislation is a great tool to make this happen. So if we go to the next one. So I'm going to go through some open space kind of case studies in Newark, in Hoboken, and in Morristown, just really quickly. And what are the things that I saw amongst these? That land acquisition is always challenging, and to find the space to put these things and people to give up their properties, or for the municipality even to give up their property. And how does that work, and how has that played out? Where does the money come from to build these places? And in terms of like, what's the deal between private developers? As Dan said, we have to take care of the landlords who ultimately pay the property taxes, and how do they contribute? And then maintenance, governance, and programming, which was all those verbs that Dan mentioned. Who pays for all that, and how does that play out over time? So if I know one thing about people from Westfield, is they like details. And these are going to be the types of things that ultimately form the details of the arrangement, for any sort of downtown redevelopment. And I wanted people to understand what has happened in other communities to create some of the most iconic public spaces in New Jersey. So if we go to the next one. So this is Hoboken. I don't have a year for this image, but this is probably my grandfather's Hoboken. Industrial waterfront. You could see there what is now Hudson Tea, what is now Maxwell Place. This is the coffee and tea picture, which were two big industries in Hoboken waterfront at the time. And if we could go to the next one. So ultimately, there was this vision many years ago now to create a waterfront promenade along really the entire Hudson River, but in Hoboken in particular. And really what this involved is a whole series of land swaps, of land dedications, and the creation of the corporation is called the South Waterfront Corporation, which is members of that are big developers, the Port Authority, the City of Hoboken, and others, to create really that operating mechanism to fund these open spaces, to fund the events, to fund the programs. And it's a really unique model. And you could see what some of the results are if we could go to the next one. And so this is, I think, Pier A in Hoboken. And, these were all kind of funded through this mechanism, a combination of federal funds, a combination of private monies. We go to the next one, Dan. And this ongoing revenue that comes, this is Maxwell Park, I believe, at the Maxwell Place development project, and ongoing revenues that come from really thousands of apartments that line the waterfront along the Hudson River in Hoboken. They all contribute every year to the things that go on to the maintenance and upkeep of this park. So that is like part of the deal with this open space. If we could go to the next one, please. So this is Newark, and I'm actually looking out my window right now, and I'm looking right at this space. So this is what now is Mulberry Commons in Newark. You can see the Prudential Center for those of you who are familiar with this, and Mulberry Street running right in front of the Prudential Center, and the big warehouse building, which is now called Ironside Newark, which used to be called like the Central Graphics Building my whole time going to college here and school here. And now, if we could go to the next one. There was this vision to create, to make that warehouse, to reinvent that warehouse, to use the Prudential Center to activate it. A lot of the criticism with the Prudential Center is that it was an island. It was this big $100 million island that really didn't have a lot of other activation or integration with the city of Newark. And it was a place for visitors, not a place for the people that lived here. So this is the space that ultimately was created through an incredibly complex set of land swaps, this was I think like a $20 million project where the city bought other properties to make parking lots for the 2 parking lot providers, so they would give properties to create this one comprehensive piece of open space. So it really does, and the visionaries of this project were right, that the shape of the space matters, that the location of the space matters, that the size of the space matters. Because when you look at it today, and we could go to the next one, to make this connection and to create, and this is a really special place. It's open to the public. I don't see a lot of people there. If you want to go take a weekend walk or something, it might not be the first thing you thought about, but it is worth going to. They have these new fountains that are there right in front of the Prudential Center. And what I thought was interesting is this long space that hits up against these different private uses. And each of them were private stakeholders that funded this whole project. They all got something out of it, and all of their clients, customers, visitors, constituents all got something out of it, which was smart, and it was part of the design there. So this is that cool, like kind of very active, attraction space that's sitting right outside the Prudential Center. And if we could go to the next one, and then you have this other space which is right near the street that cuts in between it. Like, this is the place for the kids. This is the place for the public. And this is the space for everybody. So like, I call this an adult playground, where you have this like log scramble, you have like this oversized slide. People, as I'm sure Dan can attest, like we always ask, where's the joy? Where's the joy in public space? Because if you could deliver that, people will come back. And that's what we want. And then you go to the next slide. Then the rest of the space is kind of like an office courtyard for all the people that work and shop or whatever in the office building. So each of the different constituents that are associated with the different uses around this open space have gotten something out of it, and continue to get something out of it. And I think that that's an important thing to consider as we're designing open spaces. What's next to them? What uses are we trying to support? What uses are we trying to serve? And how do we kind of use that to attract people to invest in Westfield's public spaces in a way where they see the value opportunity? And I think that will be one of our goals. If we could go to the next one, please. So this is one that I did. And this one is Morristown. It's the Speedwell redevelopment area. And this was like an impossible piece of land. And sometimes, like, even the High Line was like this impossible piece of infrastructure. And it's like, do we get rid of it? What do we do with it? Oh, we'll build a park on top of it. So here, this was a place where there was an underground stream, so we couldn't build over it because the state had regulations over it. It was sloped. It's a bowl. It's really, it would be impossible to do any sort of development on it. So what we ended up with, if we could go to the next one, is sort of this like little river valley park. And one of the things I think that was critical here is we had to be very careful not to make this space feel like it was owned by the apartment buildings next door. So we put that road in there to separate, and that's a public street, and that we were very deliberate about making that a public street. But ultimately, this was a deal that was struck between the town and the developer of these some 500 units. They each paid for half. They each pay for half of the maintenance ongoing, and it's literally broke ground last week. So this is current, and all the tools are out there to make these things happen and make these things a reality for Westfield. I'm so thrilled by the opportunity to be working with this team, to be working with this community, and to have the bones of Westfield kind of to work with to make something new there. So if we could go to one more, yeah. So I guess some of the lessons learned, we should know what our local priorities are, and we should know what we want. And that will be really important as Dan goes through these exercises, as he showed the pictures of, take them seriously. Because we need to hear from you. We need to hear what will resonate. Because the only way, and I really do believe that everybody involved here is so committed to making sure that they deliver for the people of Westfield and for the community, and to really deliver value. So we just need to hear from you now, ultimately, what's it going to be, and what's important to you. That they really should be connected and comprehensive. Olmsted, one of the most famous landscape architects, he talked about the the emerald necklace. So you had parks, and then you had these areas that connected. So our streets, Westfield streets, will be the chain in that necklace, and that the Snickelways and these other little jewels will be the emeralds on that necklace. So they should be connected, and because we don't want these little isolated assets. Capitalize on every opportunity. Again, a Snickelway, it might not be thought of as this like precious little public space, like Richard's just dying to turn them into a piece of art. So we might not always look at them. They're not always obvious, but let's capitalize on every space we can and make every space precious and special, because in a small downtown, every place is precious and special. And I guess the last thing is location, location, location. Not all public spaces are created equal. They're not all equally located. That a small public space at the right location, I would say, is worth way more than, in terms of downtown development and the economics and all of that, than something on the outskirts of town that's 10 times the size. So that's those are my slides. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you for everybody for letting me be on this panel.
Thank you, Phil. Really, really great advice that you left us with at the end, and the call for action that we all want to hear all the voices in Westfield to really figure out what the best network of public spaces look like for this community moving forward. So we've got a little bit of time to take some questions from the public. I think we've gotten a few through the Facebook feed. Janisa, can I ask you to let us know what the first question is?
Sure. Thanks, Asima, and great job to all of the panelists. We have a few questions and comments that have come in. The first one we've received is from Aiden Isaac, who asked, is there a relationship between the investment in programming with improved transit bike networks? I'm curious to learn how users are accessing the places, especially if they're in more suburban towns.
Great question. I'm wondering, Don, do you want to start with talking a little bit about our circulation plan, and then maybe Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that the town has put a substantial effort and thankfully received this great grant from DOT, and we did a bike ped plan, a document I mentioned. It is on our website as well. And the municipality, Westfield, recognizes that moving people using different modes is all very important. We want to be able to walk, we want to be able to bike safely. And there's a lot of discussion in that document. And you can even link it with the parks plan about how important it is to create these linkages. And I'm thinking of something Phil just said. But we want to be able to link our destinations, and that includes a link to transit facilities. So a big piece for us here in Westfield, especially post-pandemic. What are travel modes going to be like? What are parking demands going to be like? How is all of that going to shift? So I think we're well positioned to take the next step and really promote micro or multimodal travel here in town.
Bill and Richard, did you want to add anything to that?
I'll just say really quickly, as I was looking at Richard's slides as we were preparing for this, and he was showing all these great pictures of all these great moments in Westfield of like people doing swing dancing in Quimby and people starting the race and people listening. And I said to him, it's interesting that these are all in the street. Like all these things were happening in like these places that weren't made for them. So it's interesting that like right now streets are being used as public spaces. And I think that when we get some real public spaces in, the streets will come, we'll be able to take on like even a different life. And the one thing I'll say is that if we did a map tomorrow and we actually measured the square footage of all the, all of Westfield, and we looked at how many square feet or acres are in the streets and how many square feet are on the private properties, it's probably about equal. So we have so much space, and we really need to think about how that space is being allocated and how it's being prioritized. Like there's a famous saying, like if you plan for cars, you get more cars. If you plan for people, you get more people. So I think that's the kind of thing and the thinking that should guide us as we think about these connectors that the questioner asked.
Good.
Richard, did you want to add anything? Or
I'm so stupid. No, I'm not muted. Well, the only way I would wrap it up is listen, towns and cities and neighborhoods are organic and alive things. There's often the desire by planners, politicians, and whatever else to design the finished product. I had a professor who wrote a book called Building the Unfinished. These spaces don't mean nothing until the people are there playing the wrong kind of music at the wrong time of day or whatever else. And if Bryant Park proves anything, give me a list of all the stuff going on in Bryant Park over the course of a year on a big giant piece of sauce. And somehow you can watch a movie there, you can do a dance there, you can take a nap there. And I think that's the way you have to look at it. These places are as alive as the people who towns. But remember that quote, we design the things and then they design us. And if you always keep that in mind, it's going to be interesting every day, like Brian.
You want to take one more question?
Sure. I think we have a couple more questions. And Asima, I know you had a couple of questions you wanted to maybe pop out if the listening audience wants to stick with us for just about 5 more minutes. April Stack, who is from Ward 2, she asked, are any of these options available for the south side of Westfield?
I'm so glad you asked that. I'm going to answer it differently. These are required on the south side of Westfield. We're not talking about the haves and have-nots. You can do a little thing called a hopscotch game on a sidewalk with a piece of chalk. I'm not proposing that's what the south side of Westfield gets, but it makes a very good point. And when the great part of it is, just means you can do more things and more different things. And I think this needs to be a real call to action and a call to freedom to let a store or a house or a bar or whatever. You've got a good idea. I am quite certain that as we grow into this, the town administration will find ways to help make that happen. Great question. Thank you.
We have one more question, Asima, and then I'll turn it over to you. This is an interesting question. Who is typically responsible for putting together all of the programming in these public spaces? That might be one for Dan.
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally young people. A friend of mine once said the fast food industry in the United States is run by teenagers. And that's true. And the programming in Bryant Park is run by teenagers. We conceptualize it up here in the office, but the program is done after the consultation with town residents and visitors and office workers and retailers and the like. And then programming partners are recruited, and that can be anybody from a chess club to a local bird watching group. They come in and do the intellectual content, but the actual day-to-day things, whether it involves games or lessons that now have to be kind of managed by somebody, is very young people who are trained by us. And if anybody watching has people who'd like to be involved in possibly some early experiments in programming, send them our way, because it's a great career, and the people who started doing that then go on to great things later in their career. So it's a combination of some early concepts that come from the community workshops, and then programming partners, and then very young people who learn how to interact with the public while the programs are proceeding.
And Dan, in terms of the organization that has the long-term responsibility for programming, I believe it's usually for Bryant Park and 34th, it's a business improvement district that's been created to support that.
Correct. It's very often, this firm has huge clients that you've heard of, Brookfield and Hines and the like, and Oxford, and they always tell us that we don't want to run these programs. We don't know how to. We're too big and complicated. You stay around and run them for us. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But that's in the case of the New York entities, it's handled by a business improvement district, as you say, or in the case of Bryant Park, it's really a park privatization unit called Bryant Park Corporation.
I might just add one thing. Dan's here because he's working with us at Streetworks because of his expertise, and we've worked together before, so that we're not making this stuff up. When I talk to Dan about croquet or whatever, he goes, oh yeah, you need 12 by 32 and his people can just say what it is and crank it out, and we know it's going to work and we know what it's going to cost. And when we begin to submit our proposals for our properties and the train properties, it won't just come with one Dan plan, but funny names everywhere. We will submit a business model and a strategy for paying for things. And how do you do this? We're not making any of this up. So if we show it, we're doing it.
Asima, we have one other question, which I think is really important for the community of Westfield, related to green bridges and green tunnels and connecting the north and south. Also, are the new projects ideally, will they incorporate green infrastructure, permeable streets, rain gardens, storm drains, native plants, et cetera? This is from Curdy Malik, who's really concerned about the environment.
Wants to take that one.
I think I'll answer that partially, and I'm sure Phil can talk about it more in the redevelopment context. But, you know, with the redevelopment law and the ability to create specific redevelopment plans and have redeveloper agreements with who's coming in and developing, we're in the driver's seat. The community is. We have great flexibility with what regulations or requirements we can put into our redevelopment plans, which will specify how a property can be developed. We can emphasize or require green infrastructure. We can even, I believe, get as specific as types of planting. So the redevelopment law really for us planners and for municipalities is a very powerful tool to help bring forward the vision that you want to see, or see the vision fulfilled for specific properties, exactly how you want to see it fulfilled.
Yeah, I'll just add that I would kind of channel my inner Richard Heapes right now and say they must have green infrastructure, you know, for them to be successful. And again, in terms of the kind of call to action that Asima mentioned, these are the things we need to hear, these priorities. We're going to need to hear, and people need to participate and bring these voices forward. That's, you know, one of our primary messages in being here, and that there's just so much possibility and opportunity, I think, that will be in front of the Westfield community in the next 12 months.
Wonderful, thank you. So much potential. I had a couple of questions, but I think we can save them for the next conversation in the interest of time. And I want to just give my thanks to all of you for putting this inspiration in front of all of us as we go forward and thinking about what Westfield downtown's redevelopment could look like. And thank you for letting me be part of this conversation, and look forward to more. And I'll turn it over to you, Mayor.
Yep, thank you, Asima. Incredible job moderating, and thank you to this crew. I am always so inspired and excited when I see the level of professionalism and expertise that we have that's working on behalf of our community. And I hope that was evident to everybody in the community tonight. And a couple of things that really stuck out at me. Phil, you showed that aerial view of Westfield. I've seen it a gazillion times, but whenever I see it, it always strikes me about how much asphalt there is, and all it does. I just see potential. And we talk about green spaces and public spaces, and it gets me really excited about what's possible. I also think we want to say, let's plan for people. Let's plan for people more than cars. And I think, I love that saying that you mentioned, because I think it's so true. And I do want to tell everybody we will be doing a series of Facebook Live panels focused on different topics based upon topics of the day, experts available. And I would also invite the public, if there is a specific topic that you would like to hear about related to potential, development and planning and whatever else, please submit those, and we will see what we can do about putting those types of panels together in the future. But we hope to do these every 6 weeks or so, and it's a way to continue to educate the public. But we have desperately want you to stay engaged, and all I could ask is that what we end up doing is only going to be as good as the input we get. And this is not my plan or our plan or the governing body's plan. This is your plan, and it needs to be your plan to be successful. So please stay engaged and offer your input. And we are very, very excited. The future is very bright in Westfield, and I hope you all felt it today. And can't wait to be playing chess in the street and everything else. So great days ahead. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Dan, Richard,
Good job,
Bill,
everyone.
Don, Asima. Thank you
Pleasure.
all. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.